All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. It is a question and answer session. So this session will be recorded and the recording is available on the Code Adoption Toolkit, usually within a week or so. If there are any issues with audio, feel free to write me in the chat. And I'm Erica DeLello, and I'm a project manager for NORESCO. This series is sponsored by the Colorado Energy Office with training materials or really subject matter expertise coming from Strums Coda Associates. So we've been working with the Colorado Energy Office to provide trainings like this one. This is actually the last of our current webinar series, but we will be kicking up the webinars sometime in the new year again. So please keep an eye out for an email for registration. And I think Excel Energy is also providing trainings. You got a couple more this year, Hope?
We have one on the 28th of December, and then we'll start back up in January, where again, in collaboration with the Colorado Energy Office, the first and third Wednesday of each month.
So with all that said, though, we do still offer tailored group trainings or technical assistance for code adoption. So if you have an interest in any of that, feel free to write me through email or in the chat. And most of you might know about the Code Adoption Toolkit and all of the resources available. If you don't, please check it out. The one that I wanted to highlight today is the Code Helpline, and this helpline is available to anyone in Colorado that has a question on any of the I codes. So the IBC, IECC, there we go. The IMC, IPC, and so on. And then also any amendments that some jurisdictions have since we're a home rule state, or stretch codes. So feel free to use that as a resource, and subject matter experts like Gil and Hope will respond to you in just a few days' time. So just a couple housekeeping items before we jump in. The way that we'll start this, if you have questions, please write in the chat or the Q&A, either works, and Gil or Hope will be fielding those questions. You also have the ability to raise your hand and ask the question directly to the subject matter experts, and then I can unmute you. And lastly, there is a survey window that will pop up following the webinar. So please just take a moment to provide that feedback, and we can continue to improve on these webinars. So while we wait, hopefully you guys have some questions in the audience for us. But I know that Hope had a few questions come up at her latest training that we thought would be interesting to bring to this group and kick us off. So while we wait for you guys to write in, first question over to you and Gil is commercial air leakage testing, and is it required for all residential occupancies? Oh.
Yeah, that was a fun discussion. In the 2021, there was a little bit of a shift. Previously, you had the option that you could either go prescriptive, where you follow, section A to section Z, or you could do, basically a blower door test, a commercial blower door test. But the choice was yours as a designer as far as what you were going to do for your project. In the 2021, very similar to what you find on the residential side, it is required for our occupancies. Now, there are some exceptions for our occupancies and I occupancies, but the state of Colorado, those exceptions are climate zones that are outside of Colorado. So basically in Colorado, occupancies are and I will require blower door testing. Anything you'd like to add, Gil? You're awfully quiet.
Well, it's not that controversial. I was just going to pull up the code on that. so that we could see what it looks like in the 21, huh? Just, I don't know, just for fun, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does everybody like looking at the code? I'm finding it here before I make everybody dizzy. Okay. And the only thing that's, really different is you've got the ability now to, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Is the ability to have, rather than dealing with the volume of the very small apartment buildings, which is generally where this will end up showing up, right? I went into the commercial piece here, but the same thing would be for most of the time where we get the confusion is R2s that are 3 stories or less in height, and that essentially is going to be that way forever, meaning that R2s, 3 stories and less, will always be out of the residential portion of the energy piece. Board of Directors has made that call. So here's all the sections that talk about the testing that's required, the table. I mean, it changed a little bit here and there, but essentially says the same thing, right? Got to have air barriers pretty much everywhere so that the insulation works properly. But here we get into the testing, and we get into this nice little piece about heated garages. In 21, it was really nice because we made that distinction. It's just like, guys, we really want to separate the garage from the house. Okay, so if it happens to be if it happens to be a heated garage, we're not including it in the air barrier test. It's not included in the blower door test. We're just doing a visual inspection, and that's what this exception talks about here. But here is where we get into the testing. This little exception down here talks about, rather than the volume, it talks about our, what the heck did they call it? The
CFM per square foot.
Well, per square foot, but it's the dwelling unit
Enclosure.
Yeah, closure area. Thank you. Yeah, and so the big difference there, okay, is that we're not doing the building now. We're doing the enclosure area for the dwelling unit, and so that means the walls that are connected to each of the other units. It's not just the thermal envelope anymore. That is a big change.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're testing the unit and not the building. 2 entirely different subjects, right? Now, okay, so enough about that. We don't have to talk anymore about that.
No, that's a great point, Gil. Thank
Yeah.
you for taking us on a tour of what it looks like in the code. It looks like we got one question for you guys so far. So Dan kicked it off for us. The question is, if cooling is done through multiple 5-ton split system units, and all units add up to over 65 kBTU, do they need an economizer? If it's not an RTU, how do you have an economizer?
Yeah. So what you're saying is that we've got a commercial type occupancy, Dan, and we're talking about individual. Yeah, that's fascinating. If you don't have an RTU, you're still going to be able to do it. It just depends on how it is they're bringing in their outside air, right? So the entire, individual room units in the room of a restaurant. Fascinating. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So they must be using residential style stuff, huh?
Oh.
They're not using an RTU. So the whole idea behind air conditioning units is that, or the economizers, is that we're bringing in the outside air when we don't have to actually have the air conditioning. So if we're conditioning into the inside to 75 degrees and it's 70 degrees outside, we don't need to run the air conditioner. That's a fascinating thing. I think I would actually, they've put a 5-ton unit in front of the roll-up doors.
Oh.
I think Ms. Medina did a really good job. I believe it was in the 21, wasn't it, Hope, that
It is in the
that said,
21.
dude, really? If you're gonna have these holes in the side of your building called doors that you just leave open, you gotta make some adjustments, because what we're not gonna do, I mean, I'm paraphrasing clearly, but what we're not gonna do is put a 5-ton unit in front of this hole so everybody can stay cool because you want the hole open and it's, 95 degrees out. That's not happening, right? I mean, it's just like, guys, really? No. That's fascinating. As far as the economizer goes, there isn't any reason that they couldn't, even with a residential style furnace, if that's what they've done, that you can't bring in 100, you could bring in 100% outside air. It's not that you couldn't. It's just that wouldn't be an economizer in the sense that it's built into the unit. So what it would be a very large duct that would have a damper in it, essentially, that would then modulate based on the amount of outside air that they need, because they're going to have to bring the outside air to breathe. I mean, unless they've done it naturally, right?
Well, they got a big opening for that, don't they?
Well, it sounds like they got a huge opening. It may not need mechanical ventilation, but they do have to do the economizer piece. And I don't know that I've actually ever seen anyone try to do that. I just, Dan, you get the unique ones. You should see that plan. I'd love to see it.
I was sitting there thinking about it. I'm like, I don't
try to imagine it, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if that helped you or not, Dan, but I know. Unbelievable.
Oh, wow. It's also on the 2003
code. Well, clearly they don't care. Just, why even have walls and buildings, right? Just open her up, right?
Did you say 2003 code?
Yeah, 2003.
Oh, then there's like almost
zero.
The economizer, I don't think it was even in the 2003. That
I'd have to look it up.
Come in until I want to say 9, but I could be.
I'd have to look. 2003 was way different. The formatting is way different in the 2003 for the energy code. That's where we had 21 different climate zones or something, 12 different climate zones.
And the book was about 12 pages thick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Dan, that's a good question. I don't know that's even there. Did you find a section that's actually said it? I don't know that it exists. Because that's going way back. Jeez.
He said it was there.
Oh. See, what do I know?
Building design for all. Oh, well, that's 90.1.
Dan, do you know what section that was in?
Yeah, I just got rid of my questions thing here. It was there.
All right.
Building.
Oh, he can't remember. Okay.
Designed by acceptable practice is probably.
Well, Gil, do you mind taking a moment to see if you can find it? And if
Yeah,
not,
that's what I'm looking through.
maybe I lob some questions over to Hope.
Now.
Yeah, lob away.
All right, cool. All right, how do the additional efficiency requirements show on the plans? And this is specific to the IECC 2021.
Oh, that is an excellent question, because that is coming up quite a bit. Now, Comm Check does allow for you to be able to, just like in the previous editions, input what you're choosing as your additional efficiency packages are. As you may or may not be aware, in the 21, it's not just choose one of these 8 options. Now it's you have to get a total of 10 points. And to get those 10 points, you are looking at doing at least 2, if not 3 or 4, to obtain those 10 points. So there are various tables. They're set up by occupancy, And then they did increase the number of options that you have to get there. But in my opinion, one of the best thing that architects and designers and engineers could truly do is we need to start utilizing that code analysis sheet to include energy items. I mean, that's the whole point of that sheet, right? Where they're telling us what type of construction they're doing, you know, what occupancies they are. They need to start putting in what the additional efficiency packages are. And then as far as the very specific items, requirements that you choose, those items will obviously have to be shown on the plans in one fashion or the other. But outside of Comm Check, I think that your best bet truly is to start listing that in your code analysis sheet. Gil, did I babble along enough for you to?
Yeah, that's
find it?
fine. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Dan get it. And I found it. I was just looking at the different tables. So when we,
Oh, okay.
when we bring it up here, 80326.
Are you trying to bring it
As soon
up
as I
now?
get back up again, I'll bring it up, but we'll have to double check. All right, so let me share my screen again. Okay, so here's this is 2003. And here's the section Dan was talking about here, and it does talk about it. Now it's a cooling capacity greater than 65,000. Of course, they said they had a 5-ton unit at half a dozen holes. The only thing that, and it says the same saying 100% outside air. We can just ignore these because the climate zones in this code are way different than the other code. I'm not sure. I think climate's code 12 or something like that for Colorado. We'd have to double check again. But I don't know. Did you check the efficiencies? The efficiencies here are so low relative to what you get today. They might meet the efficiency and not have to deal with it. And it's not a evaporative cool. It's not a swamp cooler. And we'd have to look. Dan, what did you see? What climate zone Colorado was in that? Because I forget. I want to say it was 12.
He's saying 13B.
13B. So there's no. Oh well, yeah. Well, if there's 13B, that would be the exception number 3 there. And if everything's less than 135,000 BTU. But it doesn't sound like it is at 60,000. I mean, the 2 units, it puts it at 120.
I think he said the total, yeah, the add up to over 65,000 BTUs. So all 5 systems add up to 65,000.
Yeah, they didn't clarify it very well. You still get into that debate today. Is it each system or is it the whole building system, right? Fascinating. No, that's what it says. So if they've got that stuff, they have to do it. And it just seems odd. Yeah, you're right. 5 units make 1 system. I would agree with that. So yeah, looks like they got to do it. And if they're not bringing in outside air, that's going to be tough. You know, if they're using like mini splits, right? They ain't got that. They don't have that. Not that I'm aware of. Okay, I'll stop.
All right. Any other questions, guys, in the audience today? Please write them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep going down our list here.
You guys are very, very quiet today.
Right.
Yeah. You know, they're too busy eating lunch.
You know, you can
We don't
raise
care
your
if you talk with your mouth
hands.
full.
That's right.
All right, let's see. Okay, so this was one of the discussion items that you said happened at the training about NFRC certificates not showing the information or not available in inspections or applicable for plan review. So Gil seems quite urgent.
Yes.
To answer
I
this
guess you could
one.
call it one of his, not pet peeves, because that's probably the wrong word, but
Yeah, so what we're looking at, so there's a couple of different ways, okay? So the way the whole system works, this whole piece for commercial windows, is that we're dealing with the entire assembly, right? We've had that conversation. And the reason that we get residential style windows all the time is that they make the same window a million different times, right? So they get the window tested, they get the label, and then they've been given the authority through NFRC, the listing and their registration, that they can just slap the stickers right on the window, okay? Because they're just making over and over again. The problem with commercial windows is that we've got all different kinds of frames, all kinds of different glass, and all kinds of different spacers that put the glass together, the little space that goes between the glass, okay? And what we're looking for is the U factor and the solar heat gain coefficient as it relates to the entire assembly, all of it together. And the problem is that the manufacturers have done a great job of testing all their glass. They know exactly what their glass does. They know what their frames do, and they know what the spacers do. And what NFRC has is a piece of software that engineers that are licensed with NFRC to run the software, and they run a simulation to say, hey, this is what this bad boy will do once it's all put together, okay? And it's for each job. It's for each project. Even if one project's using the same glass as the other, or the same frame and the same this and that, okay? And so on the screen right now is something that you can get from typically from the frame manufacturer. This is Conair, one of the Conair systems. And it's, many pages, it's like 54 pages long, okay? All the different specs and all the different ways. But what they have in here is this little thermal performance table. And I personally have allowed this for plan check, okay?
Yeah, me too.
And these are usually very close to what you end up with because they're pretty good. Here, they're pretty good with it, okay? I've not found a lot of discrepancy between it. So the way these tables work is that 9 times out of 10, they know what you'll see in your Comm Check is what we call the COG, or the center of glass U factor, okay? So if you get a Comm Check that says, hey, my commercial windows, their U factor is a 0.29 or a 0.26, you can almost be guaranteed that that's the center of glass value, not the value that you're gonna get, okay? So what you would do is, if you know the center of glass, which generally they do, right? Because the glass guys, so what's your glass? 0.29. Well, it's truth for glass, just not the assembly. So if we come down here to, I don't know, looks like we're at a 0.29. So the value overall with the frame and everything else is going to be somewhere between a 0.45 and a 0.46. Huge difference, huh? Big difference. They got the same thing for solar heat gain coefficients based on their frame, okay? And this is the biggie. So not only is this a biggie, but this is a huge one. The solar heat gain coefficient is what the mechanical engineers are deciding what the solar gains are, right? And then what the heat loss is going to be for the U factor, okay? I mean, we're doing skyscrapers that are all glass. Imagine what the difference it makes. It's like, oh, it's 0.29. Well, no, it's not. It's actually, right, more like a 0.45. Oops, okay? This isn't bad. This you could get for that. But what they have to have at final, so by the time the glass and the windows are being installed, this certificate should be available. And this is the one that shows compliance. This is the one where the engineer is gone through, right? This is an old one, but it, you know, just look up, go to the NFRC website and look up Parker, right? How many have been issued to Parker, Colorado, and you'll see all of these, right? So it's giving you where it's at and what the project name is, and says, okay, well, these are the windows that we installed. This is an entrance door, and this is the curtain wall, the storefront system that they did. And we're seeing here, the curtain wall was like a 0.39 solar heat gain. Visible transmittance, we haven't gotten to that in the code yet, a little bit. But it gives you that, you know, how much of the actual natural sunlight or the visible light's actually coming through the window. That's what that means. So this is what we should see. And this trips a lot of people up, okay? A lot. I just had one from a jurisdiction where they said, oh no, we've got it, we can get it, no big deal. And we said, okay. Put a big red mark on the front, said, hey, you're gonna have to have this NFRC certificate before you can move into your building. Oh, they got it. And their Comm Check, guess what their Comm Check showed? A 0.29. And I told them, right? And guess what they came back with? It was like a 0.45. So it was simple. We just said, hey, I know the building spun, but looks like you need to rerun your Comm Check because clearly you don't comply yet. Not a good scene. Not a good scene, right? It provides this learning opportunity for folks. So it's amazing. I mean, this has been around. It's like anything. This thing's been around forever. I mean, when was the last time? When did we not see that the windows had to have an NFRC certificate in the code, right?
I don't know. Let's ask Dan. He's having fun in the 2003.
Right. Let's ask Dan. Hey, Dan. Never mind. So anyway, that's the long and the short of it. But it's a process, and it's not. You know, the fewer windows, the more expensive, depending on, you know, how many different types you've got. I don't know. I mean, you could spend a couple of grand probably doing this to get it through. You know, so for bigger projects that are, you know, $30 million projects, you know, this isn't a big deal. You know,
Yeah, the one thing I would say, just adding to that is, you know, a lot of times, you know, people kind of think about, well, what are the actual consequences? Are you going to make them, you know, change windows and, you know, for the whole project? You know, depending on the size of the building, there's that nice little new law that has recently been into effect, you know, the benchmarking, where you're documenting the energy usage, and windows can play a huge part in that energy use of a building. So there may not be like immediate, tangible, graspable consequences from installing, you know, maybe incorrect from the design, but there will be down the road as the mechanical equipment is not functioning properly, so their energy use goes up, and, you know. So that's my 2 cents to the deal. I knew Gil would have lots of fun. You have fun on that one.
I'm still not seeing any questions from the audience. All right.
Can I ask a question of the audience?
Yes.
All right. So just kind of tagging on to what, you know, we just discussed. How many of you are actually getting the framing manufacturer information for the glazing and getting the NFRC certificates out in the field? Or is it something that has been a battle? Just, I guess, raise your hand. Can they raise their hand, Erica?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, they can raise their hands.
Okay.
We got Dan.
Okay.
That's all I'm seeing. Anyone else?
So everybody else, it's no big deal. This is like, you know, everyday stuff, piece of cake. We've been doing this for years. No big deal. Everybody knows what we're talking about.
Oh, That's great. I'm happy to hear that.
Oh my gosh. How come I just know it isn't true? Why do I have a sneaky suspicion?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that that was a pretty good discussion that we had concerning that at the training.
Mhm.
So, you know, something to kind of, I guess, keep in mind about.
Work it in. You just work it in, just like anything. Just
Yeah.
talked to a jurisdiction the other day that having trouble interpreting what they'd gotten for a comm check. And I said, well, it's an existing building. The first place you go is chapter 5 of the energy code. And the first thing they need to do is bring the entire building up because it was a change of occupancy. Really? Really? I said, yeah. And I said, it's the one thing that just, man, it just, they throw the book at you on that section. I'm telling you. They give you an extra 10% on Comm Check, an extra 10% if you're doing, performance. He says, but they've got a task. I mean, that's a task, right? And they're like, wow, we had no idea. And I said, well, we all learn something every day, and this is the way it is. You just take one step at a time and move on. And it's the same thing with this NFRC stuff. We didn't do it. We knew it was there. I knew it was there. But trying to get the contractors to do it, it took time. Took some time, and it took learning opportunities. And they realized it wasn't doing what they thought it was. And they didn't know. Designers the same way. When you work with designers, it's the same thing. It's like, we didn't know. Talk to your glass folk. They know now. Yeah, getting in the field was hard. I bet, Dan. Absolutely. Yeah. Because you tell them, right, and it's right there on the plans, and I know you and I have talked about that. It's like, guys, we can't, right? What the heck? I'm happy if I get a window sticker and showing U factor, tempered glass, safety glazing, showing U factor and safety glazing. Well, Derek, you're right. And for residential stuff, no big piece of cake, dude. That's easy. It's the commercial stuff that's hard, because they just don't know, and there aren't a lot of folks finding compliance with it. That's all. And so that's why it's difficult. It's just not there. I mean, when we were doing it back in the day, we had one glass supplier that finally got it and got a hold of the engineer that does it. And once he got a hold of that person, it was piece of cake, because he would get a preliminary report for code compliance. And it would just say, preliminary, and until the order was purchased, which is what the process is, right? These engineers don't want to do the calculation unless they know that that's the glass and the frames that are going to be showing up at the job site. And the best way to do that is after they've placed the order, right? They want to see that it's been ordered. And so that's why it doesn't get generated until after, the windows start showing up, because the guy didn't even start doing the work until the order was placed. So yeah, that's the time to start asking. You see the windows going in, says, okay, well, that should be ready.
Yeah,
right?
and to quote Robbie, inspect what you expect. So if you're
That's right.
expecting to get that certificate, then you need to, follow through and say, hey, because remember, sometimes no is actually the answer that we have to provide for them. So
trust through verification.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to this next one. How can we get the needed information out of the spec book and on the plans for everyone involved in the project?
That is, that's not something I push personally, because I'm a fan that the spec book is part of the construction documents. That's just me. Okay. I know there's a lot of jurisdictions, and I've had a lot of plans examiners don't agree with that. Personally,
me too. I don't agree with you, Gil, and I'll tell you why shortly.
I know. Okay. See,
okay.
Wonderful debate.
Wonderful debate.
Because what happens, unfortunately, is the spec book ends up being the doorstop for the construction trailer. Okay. But that's not right. because they put an awful lot, and out of a lot of it, stuff is boilerplate. I get that. But there's a whole lot of detail in there, and especially when it comes to energy stuff. I mean, all the piping insulation generally is in the spec book, as an example, right? A lot of those things, all the controls, a lot of the controls that they put in there are in the spec book, right? Hey, I've got a domestic hot water recirc system, and this is the pump we've specified. Well, okay, well, how does that pump work? I got to go to the spec book. This is how it's supposed to work. So that's why I don't really push it, because when you, at least in my thought, when you start to try to get everything that's in the spec book and you're putting it on the plans, you're going to have plans that you've seen the size of those spec books. It starts to get crowded. It's like we're duplicating something that we've already told you to do. So that's my piece. Oh.
All right, now here's where I'm going to let you know that your opinion is just so wrong. And maybe I shouldn't say so wrong. I agree that the spec book absolutely has its place in this whole process, and it is absolutely part of the construction documents. What I have an issue with is there are components of the energy code that get placed in the spec book, but they're not very specific in the sense that, hey, do something like this. And what I'm going to refer to is specifically dealing with that air barrier component. You cannot, how the spec books are currently set up and written, you could not right now go through and do a blower door test and actually pass, because the plans will say an air barrier doesn't specify what it is on the plans. You go in the spec book, and the spec book says you can utilize these items as a potential air barrier, but nothing is specifically called out. So then out in the field, what ends up happening is they don't know what it is. So joints and seams are not sealed. And you've got gaps this big between like OSB or the weather resistant barrier. The Tyvek is not installed in the fashion to be considered an air barrier. And in my opinion, there are certain items that truly need to get out of that spec book and be specified specifically on the plans, and air barriers and air leakage components absolutely need to be in the on the plans themselves. I don't disagree. Spec book has its place. The piping insulation, that can go there. Some of the other stuff can go there. Air leakage of windows, that's a great one to put in there, but there are certain items that can't fall by the wayside and be an afterthought and just thrown into the spec book. And in my opinion, the air barrier section needs to be removed from the spec book and be focused forward on the plans.
I think what's important, and I don't disagree with that, because you're right. The spec book will say, hey, it could be, Tyvek, it could be this product, could be that product, could be a lot of different things. And when they do that, especially if they're saying the water resistant barrier is going to be that, and it's going to be their air barrier for the building, I need to make that clear in the plans. I do agree with that. That the installer needs to understand that it's doing both. Okay, both. Okay, so it needs to be made clear that that's what's happening, and that way the inspector can see it too. You're right. Air barriers are probably the hardest thing to get detailed on commercial plans, because you're right. They just say, well, it's in the spec book. Well, no, it's 8 different ways of doing it. And the contractor needs to know that that's your intent. That is where you're doing it, because commercial hasn't caught up yet. That it could be inside, outside, or anywhere in between, or the entire assembly, right? Could be the air barrier piece. And Mitch, I don't disagree. Spec book is difficult for inspectors. I'm not going to say it isn't, but that's all part of the deal. When I would show up at the construction trailer and I'm looking at a specific whatever it might be, I said, well, what's it say in the spec book? I don't have it. When the next time I show up, have it, because I'm not going to spend time looking for it today either. Okay. And next time they know that when they show up, it's like, well, here's the specs in the spec book, and now we can go out into the field. Yeah, you make them figure it out for you, because you're right. A lot of times there are 2 volumes of the dang thing, and there are thousands of pages. I got it. but they're important, and you just have to make it part of your routine. You just have to. I mean, because there's just too much in it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've had plans that, in my opinion, utilize the spec book beautifully, in the sense that, they put a lot of the pertinent information on the plans, but when the spec book was involved, they put the actual specification number. And in my opinion, that is utilizing the spec book properly, where we can
right
together. Yeah, exactly.
Right to it. I agree.
But not for air barriers. That needs to be placed on the plans.
Yeah, we're there. Yeah, it's a tough one. Air barriers are tough. I mean, it's just getting more and more intense that way, about getting rid of that, and the drafts and all the air infiltration through that. And some of them got it down. The nice, the liquid stuff that they use, that's, water resistant barriers and an air barrier too, is really nice. Solves a lot of issues, but it's not the most cost effective. It's going to get to a point, I think, that in residential, they realized that bad insulation was the most cost effective. And then once we started actually finding compliance to it, they realized it was the hardest to put in, right? So it actually ended up costing them more if they'd have just spent, maybe some blow in the hard spots or foam or, something. And I think that commercial builders will finally get to that too. If they water resistant barrier, oh yeah, well, that's fine. They said, but if you're using Tyvek and all that kind of, some sort of sheet good, oh my goodness sakes, all the joints and the holes and the flashing and the joints, I mean, just everywhere, right? Everywhere. They might find that it's more difficult to install and get it to act as an air barrier than it would be if they just use a liquid applied to begin with. Right? And it acts as your flashing and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, okay, sorry. Come on, guys.
No, that's great.
Here. You got two people who are just ready to talk.
Yeah, pick our brains. Right now, we'd be okay with you picking our noses.
All right. Well, yeah, everyone, come on. Use those fingers. Let's start typing and use this time. But I do have another question for you. This one came from the helpline, and it's related to compliance reports. And Gil, you actually answered this one, but the question is, I have been understanding that ResCheck report is not a compliance report for performance past and must meet code minimums, which would mean amended code minimums, and therefore cannot be used to do trade-offs. Manual JSD and ResChecks or HERS reports are not performance compliance documents. Only performance reports can be used for doing trade-offs. Please correct me where I'm wrong. And what do you consider a compliance performance report that allows for trade-offs?
Well, right now, I think there's a little bit of a controversy, and I've actually allowed, let's start from the very beginning. So ResCheck is only used, although there is a piece that says performance in the ResCheck, forget it, okay? It doesn't work. It is not a performance piece, okay? The only thing ResCheck will do is basically do trade-offs based on your thermal envelope, period, okay? And if you're on the 2018 and the 2021, and you're going to get that big red flag that says, slab on grade insulation, you can't trade it off. You've never been able to, okay? But now all of a sudden they figured it out, okay? What I have been allowing, right or wrong, good or bad, hope this could be another debate, is I've allowed them to trade off that slab edge when they are doing an actual performance rating, okay? And so it's going to be a rater, it's going to be a HERS rater generally that puts this out, but it's not going to be a HERS rating, okay, for the house. We don't care what the number is, right? What we want to do is we want to see the actual performance report that is telling us what is the energy cost for heating, cooling, domestic water heating, and ventilation now. in the newer codes. So that's what you're looking for. Okay, that is a true quote trade-off. Performance allows for the widest range of do whatever it is you want it to do. Okay, the 21 now has got that list of things that are the quote mandatory that everybody was so confused about. Now there's just a big old table in the ERI path and in the performance path that says go back to these sections and you're going to do this regardless of anything else. Okay, so the things that are the trade-offs, there's whatever you want to do with the thermal envelope, R20, R29, whatever, continuous insulation or not, as much insulation in the attic or not that you want, basement and all that kind of stuff. Okay, the other things that start to go into it is orientation and air tightness, right? How big of a system you need to cool and heat the building. That's all part of this performance piece. The important piece to get is that when you get the report for this, you want to see both designs, meaning what this does in the background is they input the way that you are building that house. It's what they call the as-built house. Okay, just exactly where they're building, and then it makes this twin, the exact same house, size, orientation, all of it, except this is what we call the reference house, and it's a code house. It's a code prescriptive house. Okay. And so what the software does, it says, okay, well, this is how much energy cost we're going to use in the reference house, and the house, the way you build it, has to be the same or less. Okay. So the key is you have to get both reports, and 9 times out of 10, all they send you is that the way they're building the house, all the different insulation values, all of it. Okay. The important thing is that 9 times out of 10, what they're trying to do is trade off, meaning not insulate the basement slab, the slab on grade stuff. And so what you have to do is make sure that when you see as built, it'll say slab on grade. And what's the insulation? It'll say R0. They're not putting any. And then when you're looking at the reference house, it needs to say what's required, R10, 2 feet, or whatever climate zone you're in. Okay. That means that it now is insulating the slab in the reference house like it should be, and it's not in the house the way you build it. Okay. 2 different things. So give me a minute, I could actually pull it up. I just did one.
Just to add to that, because Gil, you threw it out there. As far as trading off the slab edge in the performance path, that is still one of those concepts that is up in the air as they're trying to figure out if it's required or if it's not required. So until I hear specifically that in the performance path option, that it is also a requirement, that it's a mandatory item, they still have that capability of trading it off. Where it's absolutely not an option of trading off is through the res check pathway.
Yeah, and the other thing that you might keep in the 24 code, we're desperately trying to get it so that you can, like the commercial code, you can trade it off. Right now, the way it's written, you don't have that in the U factor table.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the issue. It's only in the R value table. And when you do res check, all the values are taken from the U factor table. And since there are no U factors for slab on grade in the U factor table, you can't do it. And so in the 24, the current version, so if you went in the current version, I'm pretty sure the public version, whatever we're calling it, it's in there. We actually put it in there. So if it survives, it will be there. Sorry, I'm done.
Ooh. That's a
Derek.
great question, Derek.
blower door testing for townhomes in a 4-building 15-unit complex, every unit or sample testing.
In the 2018, it allowed for sample testing. But the sample testing was not just specific to the blower door test. The option for sample testing was for all of the components that you would find in the energy code. In the 21, it is, you are no longer permitted sampling. It would be every unit would be required to be tested. And I know, Derek, you are on the 21. Oh, 2015 still in use. 2015 doesn't have sampling either. Sampling just made a brief appearance in the 2018. It was not flashy enough to continue its performance, so it was removed out of there. And speaking of performance, it was only an option in the performance path in 405 that sampling was permitted. It wasn't, sampling was available across the board. It was only permitted in 405.
No.
I hope that answered it, Derek.
Well, we've got 8 minutes left here. Any last questions?
How many of you are on the 21 currently? Just raise your hand. How about the 2018? $2015? Gil, we've put them to sleep.
Completely. Somehow, I can't believe it. But it's all possible.
It is. You know what? It's Wednesday before the holidays. After
Yeah,
Thanksgiving, there's still
yeah.
that turkey coma going on.
Yeah. It
I
would
don't
seem
know.
that way. All right. Well, on that note, let's see.
Oh, anyone for, sorry, Dan, 2003. Woohoo, we got a hand raised. Sorry, Dan, I did not go back far.
Eric says he's close to the 21. It's getting there close. Yeah,
Yes, for
good.
some reason I thought you were already on the 21. I apologize, Derek. I know you've been working really hard on that.
Good for him. Good for those folks. That's good stuff.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you to Hope and Gil for joining us today and letting us pick your brains. And thank you for all that attended today. And have a happy holiday.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you later, everyone.